another 2 or 3 minutes before we start. Thanks.
Okay, we will start in 1 minute as soon as Cynthia gets back. And there she is. So let's go ahead and get started, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's workshop on packaging. This is the second in a series of workshops that CalRecycle has had on packaging. I'm Howard Levinson, and I'm Deputy Director here at CalRecycle, and it's a great pleasure to see everyone in the room. And I know we had at least 50 or 60 folks logged on already on the webinar, so a pretty good audience for this workshop. As I said, this is the part of our continued discussions around packaging. As you all know, there's many issues related to packaging, including discussions at the legislature about marine debris and the impact of packaging on marine debris, on our ability at CalRecycle to meet our new statewide 75% source reduction recycling and composting goal. There's also correlations with greenhouse gas emission reduction goals from the Air Resources Board, and a whole host of other environmental issues surrounding the topic of packaging. So we're going to get into this quite controversial topic. I know there's going to be a lot of discussion today and a lot of different opinions. We're going to get into that full swing in a few minutes, but first I've just got to do a couple of housekeeping things. One is to let you know that in case there is a fire alarm, we need to go down the stairs and out the door and across the street to Cesar Chavez Plaza. So follow us and we'll get you out there safely. Haven't heard of any planned fire drills, but you never know. Cafeteria is downstairs. This is going to be a long day. The only break is going to be for lunch, so feel free to get something downstairs. If you need the restrooms and you're not familiar with the building, go out the doors here, take a left and another left, and the restrooms are just over on the hallway over there. Let's see, can you give me slide 2? So for our remote folks, hopefully you are seeing this. If you do have any technical issues or during the course of the webinar you want to ask questions or provide comments, use the email on this screen. It's coastal room, I guess is the acronym, at calepa.ca.gov. And we'll be monitoring that email throughout the day, and at appropriate times when you're sending questions in, we'll flag those and for the group here. So the flow of the day is going to be, it's pretty simple. We're going to have some opening remarks from U.S. EPA Region 9 Administrator Jared Blumenfeld, and our Director Carol Mortensen has been unexpectedly called away, so I'll try to paraphrase her remarks for you to give you a sense of what she was hoping for from this workshop. And then we will have a presentation based on the packaging paper that has already been distributed by Cynthia Dunn, who's here to my left. And then we'll have a large general discussion. Now, I know folks are going to want to immediately get on the platform and say what your opinions are and everything, and I'm sure you'll do that throughout the day. What we will try to do is kind of focus this discussion, first general discussion on the definition of packaging and the scope of materials that might be included in any efforts, whether they're mandatory or voluntary, so that we all have an understanding of the complexity of this universe and some of the issues that you have to think about in designing different programs. Then we'll have some breakout sessions. That's why we have the tables here. We'll have people from the side walls come in and join the tables to talk about the different policy approaches. What are the pros and cons? You're free to voice your opinion there. We'll have lunch, and then we'll have come back and have a large general discussion where you will be free to take your shots on anything you want related to packaging. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce Jared Blumenfeld. He's the administrator for U.S. EPA Region 9, and he was appointed by President Obama back in 2009. Jared has a wide range of priorities. Anybody who's worked with him knows about his passion for enforcement, environmental justice, and for trying to improve air and water quality and preserve our resources in the state and in the region as a whole. Before that, he was director of San Francisco's Department of the Environment, and he was involved in a lot of the landmark pieces of legislation and ordinances that the city passed, including the ban on plastic bags and establishment of a zero waste goal. So he's very familiar with the issues that we're talking about here today and has long been involved in them. He's got law degrees from the University of London and the UC Berkeley, so don't argue legalities with him. But with that, I'd like to introduce Jared Blumenfeld. If you can give him a round of applause.
Thanks, Howard. Thanks, Cynthia. And thanks to all of you. Early, rainy morning, lots of traffic, so I appreciate you coming. It's really, I know Carol's been in and out of work for family reasons, so I'm sorry that she couldn't be here today. She's really the life and force behind much of this, and we got involved with Cal EPA. Obviously, we work with CalRecycles day in, day out, and on this initiative, EPA has been involved for quite some time. We held a dialogue on sustainable financing around packaging back in 2011, and really started to look at what are the different alternatives that are out there. What are the things that we can do as an agency to promote packaging that doesn't end up in our oceans, doesn't end up in our landfill, but can help in the case of a state like California to achieve its 75% diversion goal. I remember as a city entity in San Francisco, when it was the California Integrated Waste Management Board, and we had to report our numbers to get our AB 939 targets of getting to 50%, just how rigorous a team they have at CalRecycles, and I really want to thank all of them. There are many people you'll hear from today, but there are many more who are working diligently, and the thing that I'm really impressed by when I talk to them is there really isn't an agenda. There's a willingness to listen, to understand all the angles, and that's what today is about. Today is about hearing, understanding, so that when, from our perspective, the reason that California punches above its weight class is on issues like tailpipe emissions. California really led the way, and the president and the administration then said, you know what, this is something we can adopt. Even in the middle of the recession, we were able to get those tailhouse emissions for greenhouse gases passed, and they keep on getting stringent. But without California's leadership, we really never would have got there. It's kind of weird because there's an echo. Yeah, okay. So the product stewardship work that EPA has been involved in over the years is kind of broad. We've done everything from looking at eliminating toxic constituents, using less material, making packaging more reusable, making more recycled content, and making products more readily recyclable. So those are some of the things that we have a lot of literature on our website. Many of you in this room on the industry side of the house have been very involved for Design for the Environment and other projects that we've looked at. And I think this affords us collectively an opportunity to think about these issues in a holistic way, to look at solutions that we may not have thought of, and bring together different ideas from different places. I know we've spoken to folks as far away as British Columbia and Germany about how they've done it, and I really want to take my hat off to Cynthia Dunn for her work in the report that we all have in front of us that she will be presenting on later. It's really, it's not an easy thing to summarize what the options are so succinctly, so thank you for doing that. I was asked by Carol to lay the stage nationally to help frame what Howard will now do for the state of California, and really kind of lay out some of the most pertinent facts around packaging as they relate to different environmental concerns. So the first one is the national number of, in terms of municipal solid waste, packaging represents nationally about 30%, or 75 million tons in the latest year for which figures are available, 2012. So 30% is actually about 5 percentage points higher than in California. So nationally, this is a big issue. As I'll speak to in a minute, it relates to many other environmental factors that we all care about in this room, that we're all trying to solve. America's Recycles Day, we saw the banner came up on the stairway. It really motivates action in a way that many other things don't. If you think about the panoply of environmental issues facing our country, recycling is one that people really understand. They understand what they need to do, and if you explain through clear education which bin it should go in or where it's going to go, it's an active involvement in the environment in a way that other things aren't quite the same. When I think about energy efficiency, once you've got rid of that old T12 linear fluorescent light, yeah, you can conserve how much you turn the light on and off, but that's going to be there for 10 years. Recycling is an active daily engagement. It's an opportunity to talk to people about how they can change behavior to improve the planet. In terms of the good news, about 51% nationally of containers and packaging were recycled. So that's a good number. It's higher than the national average of other things that are recycled, which is about 35%. So already doing more than other classes of product. But obviously quite a ways to go if we want to get to California's goal of 75%. So the region that I cover has a large chunk of the Pacific. It's California, Arizona, Nevada, but then it goes Hawaii, Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas Islands, Guam, and American Samoa. And so we spend a lot of time talking about marine debris with those island territories and states. And when you look at the, and there's a lot of data on what's been picked up on the beaches, which aren't necessarily descriptive of what's in the ocean, but it's a fairly good indicator. In terms of marine debris, 61% of the items picked up around the world on International Coastal Cleanup Day were packaging. 76% of all the cleanup items were packaging and disposable serviceware, namely cups, straws, and plates. And NOAA just came, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration just came back from a 33-day mission to remove marine debris from the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, which is a national monument, and from Midway Atoll. And they removed about 6.25 tons of plastic trash, of which about 7,500 were hard plastic fragments, about 3,500 were bottle caps, and about 1,500 were plastic beverage bottles, and the list goes on. There's about 477 lighters. So when you do that math, and I for the last 15 years have done Coastal Cleanup Day on Ocean Beach every year, there's a lot of packaging waste that ends up on our shores, and we need to think as a group, because this issue isn't going away anytime soon. It has the public's attention, and in places like Hawaii, it's ever present. If you have an island economy whose primary source of revenue is tourism, marine debris becomes a very big issue. And so when I go and meet with the governor or the senators in Hawaii, it's one of the issues that comes up at every meeting. What are we doing about marine debris? And obviously, California, we spend more time on the beach than nearly the rest of the nation combined. So that element of recreation in the Clean Water Act is important, and the state is coming up in the context of the Water Board with a trash policy. Their TMDLs, total daily maximum load requirements for many watersheds that now have trash as a component. So that's one thing that we need to think about. Another big one for us, and it's a different way of slicing and dicing the carbon pie, is about 42% of greenhouse gas emissions come from transporting goods and their packaging. It's a really interesting slice. I'm not going to dwell on it here, and we can send anyone more data on the analysis that EPA has done around looking at packaging and transportation as a way of looking at greenhouse gas emissions. But one of my favorite stats is in Walmart's quest to reduce packaging by 5% between 2008 and 2013. They took 200,000 trucks off the road as a result. So by right-sizing and thinking about packaging in a different way, they were able to take 200,000 trucks off the road. The biggest single challenge that I face as regional administrator is getting California into attainment with the Clean Air Act for PM 2.5 and ozone in the South Coast and in the San Joaquin Valley. And the number one reason that they're not in attainment is because of truck traffic, because of goods movement. So for me, it was very exciting early on to talk to Carol about, is there a way of even getting SIP credit? Is there, you know, if we were with Mary Nichols in a different room, they have a meeting on climate change today, that's what I would be focusing on. How can packaging reduction and right-sizing lead to a reduction in the number of truck trips? And if you are from an environmental justice impacted community, there's another reason you don't want those trucks. The localized air pollution impacts are very large indeed. So there's a nexus between packaging and nearly anything that we could talk about in terms of Southern California, just because of the enormous impact of goods movement in that economy. Obviously, there's thousands of jobs and billions of dollars that are tied to those economies. And so we're looking at how do you grow the economy and reduce environmental impacts. That's really been the lesson of environmental legislation in our country for the last 40 years. Those who say that they're at odds, environment and economy, really haven't got it right. Our economy has tripled, and most of our environmental indicators, certainly air pollution in LA, has gone down by 70%. So thinking about how do we marry these twin goals? We don't want to inhibit commerce. We want it to grow, but at the same time, we need to make sure that the communities that live around those transit corridors don't have negative impact. So there's a lot in the paper about what other countries have done. There's 47 countries around the world that have made producers responsible for some or all of end-of-life costs associated with packaging. There's things that have worked in some places that simply don't work in others. This is obviously a very large economy. California would be the world's 8th largest economy if you looked at it separately. So small things that may have worked in small jurisdictions aren't going to work necessarily well here. But at the same time, having run a recycling program for a city and county, you want some flexibility. You guys, from the folks that are manufacturing, want as much consistency nationally. So marrying the flexibility with consistency, I think, is going to be key. So in closing, we really applaud California's leadership in this area. We want to provide the data that we have, the science and research that we have to be able to think through some of these. I had the opportunity of just coming back from Adelaide, South Australia. I had no idea that they had a zero waste goal, that they'd already achieved a 77% recycling rate, and they're doing amazing things that we can learn from. They've already got to the goal that California wants to get to, and they've done it, I think, in a way that really was bringing industry in to think about the way to be constructive. I would end on, if we do EPR without thinking about some of these externalities, whether it's climate change or the issues of marine debris, or ones that I haven't talked about, which are the toxic constituents of the materials themselves, I think it will just require, you know, and you see this in California, it will require folks that work on these issues daily to just come back at those issues and knock them off. So either we have a comprehensive solution, which has been fairly elusive, or we have an approach where you do paint, and then you do mattresses, and then you do carpet, and then you do compact fluorescents, then you do TVs, then you do phones. And Mark Murray and others in the room have done that successfully. This is an opportunity to have more of a wraparound philosophical underpinning that allows us to move forward in a cohesive, coordinated fashion, and EPA stands ready to provide a constructive role. Thank you, and I hope you have a really good day today. It's a great group of people looking around the room. Many of you have been involved in this for a very long time. And Heidi, thank you for being here today as well. So back over to Howard, who's going to do his impersonation of Carol. Thank Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jared. I think you did a great job of setting the stage for this whole workshop. And I know that you and Carol have had a lot of discussions on this issue, and that she's on exactly the same page as you in terms of the importance and the number of issues that this juxtaposes against or with. So I think you really did a wonderful job of raising all those, and I really appreciate you coming over, and also Region 9 staff for all the work that they've done in collaborating with us over the past year or two on as we work on this. So if Carol was here, she did send us some talking points. I think you would hear a corroboration of what Jared said, that this is really something that's of critical importance to Carol and to CalRecycle for the very reasons that Jared said. And Carol dealt with this issue many, many times when she was a consultant in the legislature on various pieces of legislation, fast food packaging, the bags, and congratulations that we finally got the bag bill passed and enacted, and we'll be working on that. There's still a lot more to go, and I think she would stress the complexity of this universe of products and the number of different characteristics that are involved, and how difficult it is to try and get your hands around this. So, for now, I'm just looking at her points. What she's asked us to do is look at some of the voluntary and legislative efforts to date, identify what's working, and try to create an environment where every stakeholder in the product chain is incentivized to do its part to reach our 75% goal, because that's what she's really her primary responsibility right now, or one of her key responsibilities, is how do we get to the 75% goal established by AB 341. There are a couple of other key policy areas like beverage container reform and things like that that also are key in dealing with the household hazardous waste products that have been banned from landfills. But for today, we are focusing on one of that really high level 75% goal and the role that packaging plays in getting to that. She's well aware that it's a very complex undertaking, but that's what we have to do. Today we're putting forth some of our preferred policy options. We want to hear from you in terms of, do you agree or disagree? What do you think are the pitfalls of those approaches? What do you think are the benefits of those? And that's what much of the discussion today will be about. We do see a mandatory approach as being the most promising and effective way to move towards our goal. I know there will be disagreement about that, but we also have been looking at the voluntary programs, and while they're laudable and many of them are doing great work, they aren't moving all that quickly to get packaging out of the waste stream and get us towards our 75% goal. So I think that is the underpinning of our thinking and putting this background paper together. Looking at things in the California context is what we'll be doing mostly today, but that's also important in terms of national discussions, as Jared's indicated. People will be looking at what goes on in California. Jared will be taking that message out, and we'll be continuing to engage in those discussions as well. So Carol and I, if she was here, she'd be encouraging you to actively participate. Follow Howard's directions in terms of when to say things and when not to say things. She would say that, I'm sure. And feel free to express your opinions. This is really still a discussion workshop. We are here to get opinions, even though we have our own preferred approaches. This is a topic that clearly is going to get discussed in many different forums. We'll see what happens in the next legislative session, what kinds of bills are introduced, and there'll be lots of discussion about those. And so this is going to be an ongoing discussion, but we want to get everybody's input today, and as we continue to refine our own thinking on this. If you have written comments today or afterwards, we encourage you to submit those, and we'll always be taking those into account. So I think with that, again, I'm sure Carol would like to be here. This is really a passion for her, and I think that she'll be very pleased that we've got about 75 people in the room, and I don't know how many now on the webinar, probably another 60 or 70. So that's a pretty large representation of folks, and I think we'll have a great discussion today. So now what I'm going to do is turn it over to Cynthia, and Cynthia is going to give you a presentation that focuses on builds on the background paper that we provided, and then we'll open it up for the various kinds of discussions that we have planned for today. Cynthia's been working in the environmental field at CalRecycle for quite a while. She's got 15 years of experience in the environmental field, both in the private sector and the public sector. She was one of our lead staff who involved in the development of some of our early producer responsibility programs. She's worked on household hazardous waste and universal waste, as well as commercial recycling. She's got a BS in environmental studies from San Jose State University, and she also has a minor in packaging design. So she does know something of what she speaks when we talk about packaging. So I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia, and
Probably a little shorter, about 20 minutes.
for about 20-minute background presentation, and then we'll go into some discussion with all of you. Before I turn it over to you, I just want to get a show of hands. How many folks here are from packaging manufacturers or representing packaging manufacturers? So maybe 15, 20, something like that. How about recycling entities who are involved in recycling packaging of some sort? 10-ish, 10, 12. Environmental organizations, handful. Let's see, what am I missing? Local government, about 10 or so from local government. What am I missing?
Who else is here?
Okay. Nobody else?
Yeah, there's a lot of CalRecycles.
Yeah. Consultants. Okay. Okay. So we've got a bunch of people representing lots of different perspectives, which is good. So I just wanted to get a sense of that. So now to you.
Thank you, Howard. A couple things before I start. There's several people who are standing. We have an entire table here that's empty, so feel free to get comfortable. And I also see other seats that at the existing table, so if you want to scooch around and get comfortable. I'm also hearing an echo over here on my end, and I'm not sure. I'm hoping that that's not the case in webinar land. So I'll just keep looking over at Tracy. She's not hearing anything. Just let us know via the email coastalrm@calepa.ca.gov if you have any technical difficulties. And one more reminder: if you do have any experience any troubles with the webinar, you can go to calrecycle.ca.gov/broadcast, and you can tune in via webcast that way. So with that, I'll begin. Today, much of what I'm going to cover was presented in the background document that was distributed about 3 weeks ago. Hopefully, you've all had a chance to skim through it and read. It's titled Increasing Collection and Recovery of Packaging in California. And what it includes and what I'll be covering today are the statewide 75% goal and cross-media impacts, some functions of packaging and trends that affect packaging's recovery. We're going to take a quick look at packaging in California's disposal stream, and I'll explain a little bit about how we came to the numbers that we came to. I want to also provide to you a look into the existing infrastructure in California and the existing policies that are, it stopped, that are in use, so that as we consider approaches, we have a good understanding about what exactly is already occurring in California. From then, and in preparation of our policy discussion, I'll go over the proposed definition and scope of packaging, as well as hopefully shed a little bit more light on the priority packaging product selection process and recommendations that we came to, and then move into the policy approaches. From there, that'll take us on into the large group breakout discussion on definition and scope. Okay, so I'll move through this a little bit quickly. I think most of the people in the room are pretty familiar with the 75% goal. The 75% goal, and actually our discussion on packaging is one of a broad array of discussions that are occurring as a result of the passage of Assembly Bill 341. And what AB 341 did was established a policy, a statewide policy goal that 75% of the state solid waste be source reduced, recycled, or composted by 2020. It also established mandatory commercial recycling where businesses and multifamily dwellings that generate 4 or more cubic yards of solid waste a week are required to offer recycling. And the department then determined that about 22 million tons of additional recycling needs to occur in order to meet that goal beginning in 2020. So what CalRecycle did was begin focusing on several different focus areas that span a wide variety of our efforts here. They include moving organics out of the landfill, continuing reform of the beverage container recycling program, expanding the recycling manufacturing infrastructure, exploring new models for state and local funding of materials management, promoting state procurement of post-consumer recycled materials, and also promoting extended producer responsibility. In terms of cross-media impacts, packaging has been cited as a concern for a variety of cross-media impacts, including GHG emissions and trash-related policy or water impacts. For example, as Howard mentioned, CalRecycle does work closely with its sister agency, the Air Resources Board, on implementation of Assembly Bill 32, the Global Warming Solution Act of 2006. And the waste management sector is one of 7 sectors that have been identified to meet 2020 and 2050 GHG emission reduction goals. The scoping plan update in 2014 did include recognition of packaging issues, and in particular, it cited the need for source reduction and recycling to be more a front-end component in design considerations. The State Water Board, I'm sure several of you here are also aware, is considering amendments to the statewide water quality plans to manage trash in waterways, such as through the total maximum daily loads, as well as the significant and ongoing, I think, discussions that Jared mentioned related to marine debris, and specifically marine plastic pollution because of the negative impacts associated with harm to wildlife and ecosystems and even tourism and things of that nature. One of the things I did want to touch on that I feel I was remiss in including in the background discussion document was really, as part of this discussion, acknowledging the importance of some of the basic functions that packaging provides. So I wanted to go over a few of them. Packaging is really necessary for a variety of things, most basically containing and protecting the product. Through transport and delivery in a wide variety of climates and distribution systems so that by the time it gets to the consumer, it arrives unspoiled, it's been protected, it's undamaged, as well as protecting the consumer. And, you think things like safety seals that let you know when a package has been tampered with, when it's been maybe compromised, child-proof closures, things of that nature. It also conveys important information, dosage, ingredients, and expiration dates, things like that. There are a variety of legislated and regulatory requirements that are related to packaging as well. And it also serves to protect the product, preserve the product, for example, by extending shelf life, and which in turn can actually provide savings to consumers. So I just want to put this in the back of our mind as we continue discussions. We're not trying to have a discussion about how to get rid of all packaging, that all packaging is unnecessary, because I don't think that that's a realistic and prudent way to continue our conversation. So in terms of trends that affect recovery, many of the trends that we see actually also have some positive environmental impacts. When we look at things like lightweighting, package optimization, optimizing the product-to-package ratio, and that can include things like actually integrating the package into the product, and you can think of things like detergent pods in that respect. The shift from rigid to flexible packaging, multi-material, laminates. We could also have included bioplastics to this list. There are also these positive attributes, such as source reduction in lightweighting and some of the shift from rigid to flexible. There's reduced transportation emissions. There's reduction of volume in landfill. So I think that, again, having a holistic view of what we're talking about, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater when we're trying to look at potential solutions to address the end of use of packaging. We want to try to keep these things in mind. Some of the trends, though, that can present some problems at the end of use with packaging is when it can't be technically or economically feasible to be recycled. When it contaminates the recycling stream, when residents or processors, for example, can't easily determine how best to handle that packaging product at the end of life, end of use. That could happen from poorly labeled products or maybe materials with incompatible ingredients. It can also be problematic when it lacks adequate end markets, when there just aren't sufficient volumes of a particular material or packaging product type to make it economically feasible to be recycled. That is a significant impediment. When packaging requires additional or very specialized, expensive processing equipment in order to effectively recover, when facilities simply don't have the resources to continually keep up with a very rapidly changing packaging waste stream. Also, when the end-of-use processing requires additional energy inputs, when there's a package system that requires a lot of energy at the end of use, it can sometimes negate the energy savings that have maybe been realized earlier in the life cycle. And definitely when it escapes into the environment and winds up as litter and trash in our waterways and ultimately marine debris. So when we tried to look at packaging in California's disposal stream, we used our 2008, our most recent complete waste characterization data, and determined that ultimately packaging does represent about a quarter of all of the materials that are currently disposed. And of that, paper and plastic comprise the most prominent material types. As you can see here, about 5 million tons and 2.5 million tons, respectively. An important consideration when we were looking at this was our waste characterization studies don't track products primarily. They're increasingly, we're taxing our waste characterization folks to try and capture more product-specific data, but they really track materials. So when we looked at the amount of packaging in our waste stream, we do have some packaging product-specific data, but we also have product categories. And for those, we used the definitions that comprised a majority of packaging types. So we used those together to come up with our numbers. I mentioned wanting to give a snapshot of the California landscape, what our infrastructure and existing policies are in use. Infrastructure is an important part of the conversation. This is a snapshot. This is based on 2013 estimates, and it's some of it is self-reported data as well, but by our accounts, there are 130 active landfills, approximately 850 MRF, C&D, and secondary processing facilities, and those can include things like scrap metal processing, plastics reclaimers, plastic shredding and grinding, paper stock processing, and beneficiation. We have approximately 350 composting, chip and grind, and organics management facilities, and just the 3 transformation facilities in state. In terms of existing policies, this is 2012 reporting year. It's self-reported data by jurisdictions, but it helps to give a sense of what kind of policies local jurisdictions have put in place to collect their residents' materials, including packaging. So over 90% have curbside residential recycling programs in place, and of that, about 80% report that they have single stream. So the majority of jurisdictions in California have curbside. The majority are single stream or commingled recycling. in terms of policies like packaging-related disposal bans, there are none reported. That doesn't mean that there aren't any out there, but again, this is a starting point for us to look at sort of order of magnitude for folks who have been thinking and putting in place packaging-related disposal bans. Also noteworthy is that about half, 50%, claim that they have some form of variable rates or pay-as-you-throw in place for their residents. In order to frame this really complex discussion, we thought it would be a good idea to offer a proposed definition of packaging and scope of packaging in order to help guide our discussions. And so what we wanted to do was propose a broad definition, both because we're going to need a broad definition to capture that quarter of our waste stream in order to meet our 75% goal. And also we chose a broad definition as a starting point because it's substantially similar to existing definitions that are in place elsewhere in very mature programs throughout the world. And the definition being all products made of any materials of any nature to be used for the containment, protection, handling, delivery, and presentation of goods to the consumer. And the scope being all packaging placed on the California market and all packaging waste, whether it's used or disposed at industrial, commercial, office, retail, household, or other level, regardless of the material used. So this will be the first topic of our large group discussion. Very interested to hear thoughts on that. For the priority package product selection, so the purpose of doing this, when we've already stated that we believe that a broad definition is necessary, we wanted to go through this exercise, pardon me, to try and identify a subset that at the very least, at the very minimum, should be taken into account when we're talking about addressing packaging in California's waste stream. And this analysis, again, was just one way to undertake this kind of exploration into our material stream. There are a lot of different ways it could be done. A lot of it's based on quantitative as well as a lot of qualitative data, but ultimately the department felt that we had enough information on not only our waste stream, but the types of packaging products in it that could warrant this, justify this level of analysis. So this was challenging for a variety of reasons, some of which I just noted, and also because there are just such a wide variety of packaging types that are out there in the market and that we find in our disposal stream. So it wasn't going to be prudent to start gathering a list of all packaging product types. So what we did is we broke it out into two screenings, and one was to look at and develop criteria. The first one was a primary. Let me just get to that slide. The primary criteria was the one that was most relevant and most under CalRecycle's purview, and that was to look at what material types represent the most significant portion of the packaging waste stream. So when we looked at the various material types you see there and ran it through the filter of what really teases out as the most significant material types, as I mentioned earlier, paper and plastic really rose to the top. So from there, we went and applied a second set of criteria, screening criteria, and we looked at things like, is the packaging product on an increasing or steady usage trend? Is it something we're going to continue to see? Does it have significant or potential for significant end-of-use GHG impacts, emissions impacts? When we looked at water quality impacts, we were looking at trash-related water quality impacts. We weren't looking at things like eutrophication or acidification, things of that nature that you might find in an LCA. This was, again, more qualitative. And we also looked at, does this package type, are there in existence or upcoming opportunities for new efforts to address this? So with that criteria, we took a set of packaging types that were used in previously identified in our analysis, and we applied these criteria. What rose to the top was with the list that you see here. Again, they're primarily paper and plastic packaging types. And they're here because we're seeing, again, the increasing steady usage trend, the end-of-use GHG emissions impacts are associated, the trash-related water quality impacts, and that maybe low or moderate, only moderate opportunities currently exist in California for these new efforts. For our policy approaches under consideration, the paper outlines 2 approaches, one mandatory, and that's been identified as CalRecycle's preferred approach, as well as voluntary approach, but with a threshold or trigger in which to start pursuing a mandatory approach. When we look at mandatory initiatives as a whole, they each have pros and cons. So mandatory initiatives do have the ability to provide consistency and predictability to stakeholders in the regulated community, and that can help at times with decision-making, capital investments, things of that nature. That can help increase recovery. Something that has a statutory basis can provide specified timelines for goals, measurable, enforceable goals to be met, as well as level the playing field for all manufacturers of packaging, and something that we really tried to get an understanding of over the past couple years. And we took the opportunity to meet with some companies who are really doing really forward-thinking work. Walmart was mentioned. And other companies to understand, what is the decision-making that goes on here. There are really forward-thinking things that are happening with regard to reducing and optimizing packaging, but what can we do to bring those other manufacturers up to a level playing field so that everyone is putting the same amount of effort and resources into it? Some significant limitations of mandatory initiatives is that they do require statutory authority. CalRecycle does not have statutory authority at this time to put something in place, and that once requirements are in statute, it's not very flexible, and it's not very easy to get changes made legislatively. We provided some examples, and they are not meant to be an exhaustive list of examples of mandatory approaches, but some that are currently in use, widely in use for packaging, and those include extended producer responsibility, landfill bans on recyclables, and minimum recycled content. So for an extended producer responsibility approach, very high level, very simply, would put into place requirements for producers to design, finance, and implement a program to capture the packaging that is sold into the California market. CalRecycle or the oversight agency would do things like set goals, review and approve plans and annual reports, maintain a level playing field through oversight and enforcement, offer a level of transparency to the public and to stakeholders on how the program is working. There are though, let me go back. There are though considerations, a lot of considerations that you can imagine when looking at an extended producer responsibility approach to packaging, and we highlighted some of those in the paper itself, but they also include considerations like what is adequate level of coordination with local governments and existing programs and existing infrastructure. What does that look like? Consideration to how that might impact local governments. Defining rational goals and measurable goals so that program performance can be tracked. Defining producers and those who would be regulated under an EPR program for packaging to ensure a level playing field, and also to ensure that CalRecycle is able to do its job of oversight and enforcement and program tracking with the the least amount of resources possible. Another thing that hasn't been, in my opinion, really strongly correlated is making sure that there are how to go about making sure that there are strong incentives for source reduction and designing for recyclability and recovery, because I don't think that that necessarily has been something that's been strongly shown in existing programs. Another approach would be, and these would not have to be mutually exclusive, I wanted to add, but a landfill ban on recyclables, which would set a defined list of products that would be prohibited from landfill in California. Some of the considerations that go with that include, but would not be limited to, what recyclables should be included in that ban. Is that ban best at the local level or the statewide level? What kind of enforcement approach would be put into place? What kind of resources would that take? Should this be used as a standalone item or in combination with other policy approaches? For minimum recycled content, a lot of folks in this room are familiar with this concept. We would identify a specified product or product category that, when sold into California, must contain a minimum of post-consumer recycled content. The considerations that go along with this are, again, determining the appropriate product or product category, what is the appropriate level of post-consumer content, how does that fit into innovation with new packaging product types and systems, how to avoid those sorts of unintended consequences, what is the appropriate level of harmonization with existing programs like the RPPC program and other programs that manufacturers have to comply with. How best for the regulated community to demonstrate compliance. So, moving on to voluntary initiatives, and I included large scale here, and by that I mean, large partnerships, industry initiatives, public-private partnerships. So that's really what I'm talking about when I'm referring to these voluntary initiatives. And the pros and cons are very valid. They can provide really valuable collaboration, pulling different stakeholders together to do research projects, demonstration projects, sharing information, sharing industry information, which is always difficult a lot of times difficult, I should say, for government folks to obtain. Limitations, though, are pretty significant. We really haven't seen a lot of examples of very comprehensive voluntary programs that are able to demonstrate the kind of results that California is frankly going to need to meet the 75% by 2020 goal. The long-term commitments can be unpredictable. There are a variety of factors when there's a voluntary effort that can come into play that can disrupt the commitments. There are maybe the biggest one is in terms of identifying financing for large-scale efforts, again, like it would need in California for the 75% goal. That's been a question that just really hasn't been answered, and until now, it's really been borne by, continues to be borne by local governments and their collection programs. So, for the approach of a voluntary activities with a threshold to pursue mandatory, there are a lot of possibilities there of building on existing or emerging public-private partnerships for voluntary initiatives, and closed-loop fund comes to mind, recycling partnership, a lot of the work that has been done by organizations like the SBC that are very, very valid. There is the opportunity for these to come together into a suite of activities that can really help to move the needle. It would need, commitment for California-specific resources. Again, we have this 75% goal. 2020 is not very far away. Another, again, limitation of voluntary activities is they don't tend to be very quick in seeing results. Something like this would entail developing shared goals, shared metrics for program performance, and identifying what is that threshold, at which point mandatory initiatives would be pursued.